Hey Tom, thanks so much for joining me today.
No problem. Good to be here. Yeah, so look, I started working in the dot-com boom, and I've always been attracted to the new technologies, the disruptive situations that appear in our world, whether it was the internet, whether it was smartphones, whether it's new ways of accessing things, all the way through to now we've got AI. Um, I have always focused on how do you take those new technologies and ways of working to make a difference in people's lives and to make them real in a corporate environment. And over the last, I guess, 7+ years, I've been working in the automotive sector. So most recently, I've been running AAX, which is the business unit responsible for connected car innovation in the AA. I was CEO there. And then before that, I worked in Motion Ventures, which is an arm of Jaguar Land Rover, where we were launching new businesses. I kind of gave JLR a view of where the world was going and started to look at different ownership models, different ways of accessing vehicles, given the world is changing so much. So that's my background, but I enjoy bridging between big corporate and startup. I think there's something really interesting in that space.
Yeah. What are generally the motivations for larger corporates to enter these partnerships or start initiatives within
Um,
the boundaries of the larger enterprise?
it's a mixture of things, right? There's a fear element of, the automotive sector has been very stable for a long time. And then probably 8, 10 years ago, w- the board members, the management team started to see that autonomous, connected, electric, shared were all big trends that were coming in. And I think some of the management team were excited by that change and needed to think about how to adapt and how to make their businesses kind of find a role in the future. And some were full of fear. When I first started working at Jaguar Land Rover, Tesla was really insignificant, and now look where it is. It's a huge leading company globally, not just in the automotive sector in the US. So um, the motivating factors are often a mixture of fear and excitement, and of basically that commitment they have to shareholder value, where they need to make these businesses kind of revolutionize for the next phase of their lives.
Mhm. And especially in automotive, we've seen many examples of initiatives where this didn't necessarily go as planned for one reason or another. I can think of many mobility service companies, especially in Germany when I started working in automotive, also with ride hailing, etc. Just more generally, what are some of the typical sort of pitfalls and challenges that you see? And then building on that, are there ways to mitigate some of the risks and overcome some of these challenges?
I think um, I think one of the most important things that people often forget is that you need customers who are excited to pay you money. So a lot of the times you see initiatives or new companies that come from a very engineering mindset of we have technology, if you build it, they will come, and they don't think about the kind of the emotional kind of human experience, I guess, of why do people sign up for things, and what makes sense for people's day to day lives, whether that's in B2B or in B2C. I think that's a really big thing that often gets missed. I think there's a second piece where um, you can look at any new technology or new development. There's a lot of first movers who fail but create a lot of learnings for the next phase. Look at the iPhone. There were a fair number of smartphone type ideas out there before the iPhone came along, but they didn't get through because for whatever reason, timing, or a failure to market or explain it properly, or poor design, or whatever it might be. So I think that that's another factor. Is you know out there in the world, there are more failures than successes. And I think one of the problems we have in big corporates is people think that just because they've got a good idea, it will be a success. And there's a lot of stuff that you need to get right, a lot of hard graft, and then a lot of human psychology that makes it a success. And even then, it might be a middling success rather than creating the next Uber or the next Google. Silicon Valley has been amazing, but it's got a lot to answer for because I think there's really high expectations that you're always going to create the next big thing rather than something that's quite successful and quite useful.
Mm. When I think back to some of the ventures within larger corporates that I've been involved, there were some sort of typical challenges that I've seen around scaling, sort of moving from sort of the initial testing of ideas and engaging with customers to a larger population and really growing revenue and profit, and then also integrating, which is, as I understand in a lot of cases, the objective, integrating some of these technologies and solutions into the wider enterprise, and then also into some of these sort of core solutions and the wider product offering, where there could be some possible challenges when it comes to risk appetite and some of these traditional cultural elements. Is this a real challenge that you've observed as well?
Yeah,
And if
and
so,
experience.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And I think you've got it exactly right. Um, the, it's really easy to have an experiment. It's really easy to do something that you're a bit embarrassed by, but is theatrical and dramatic and is for a few people, and you can, I don't know, do a hackathon around it.
yeah,
That's the easy bit. And actually having the idea is quite easy, especially in automotive where, predictive maintenance, parking, all the pain points are obvious. All the kind of it's how you execute that's hard. And you have this kind of step from you've experimented, you've got far enough that you then need to get it to find product market fit and then to get some scale. In that environment, it's I've found that where these things fall down is where you haven't had blunt, honest conversations with all the stakeholders. And really, by stakeholders, I mean the people who are giving you the budget to do it.
yeah,
There's these unreasonable expectations that you'll deliver straight away. And then people don't hold their nerve. They don't embrace pivots. They get scared by them because, in big corporate world, pivots are scary. Whereas in this kind of world, you are shifting and changing on a regular basis in order to move around, and often relying on your intuition more than you're relying on actual data in the real world. So I've found that having blunt, straightforward conversations at the beginning about how this is going to be really helps, and getting people to almost commit to hold their nerve even when they're worried and scared. Um, the the next stage is, yeah, you can get to a size where you're proud of what you've done. You can see economic viability. You can see that you've got a P&L that makes sense and a path to profitability. But yeah, that kind of shift into integration is difficult. And at our, we've got a shared experience at Jaguar Land Rover. I was running mobility businesses, and specifically one called The Out, which is an on-demand rental business that has really strong alignment with what the business is doing around Land Rover, especially, but also Jaguar. But it wasn't the core of what the business does, which is to sell cars. And so the integration needs to. What I found at the AA was the integration needs to be careful, where you take it function by function and process by process,
mhm,
rather than just dumping a startup into a big corporate environment and hoping it will survive. I think that leads to just disappointment. So you integrate in shared services, you find ways that you can bring things together around the digital experience, around software engineering, all those sorts of things. And then all of a sudden, you do find that you've aligned the two businesses and you've brought some of the startup mentality and vibe over to the big corporate, but you've also need to bring some of the big corporate mentality and vibe into the startup as well. People need to recognize that they're part of one thing.
One of the potentially a controversial point, but one of the challenges that we've potentially seen in automotive is when it comes to attracting some of the latest and greatest tech talents are, I guess, pay structures and generally the attractiveness of the industry. And startups generally could potentially be described as sort of this higher risk, higher possible reward type of endeavor. How do you manage that as you transition from
I
unit
actually,
to enterprise? Yeah.
I'm, you're being controversial and I might be controversial back to you. What I have found, I don't think money is the main problem. Like we all want to get paid more, right? Obviously.
Yeah.
But if you can give people a compelling, exciting vision to get behind, like automotive is a passion sector. People love it and getting A to B, and you can link it to climate change and all sorts of exciting things. Like if you can give people compelling vision, but also have an honest handshake between employer and employee to say, look, this isn't necessarily the next Google, but over the next 3 years, I will make sure this roadmap is really testing and exciting, and I'll get you to be working with the best technology companies of the world, and you'll be making a difference to many millions of consumers because you're doing X, Y, and Z to, I don't know, all the Land Rovers in the world or all the BMWs in the world. And then you basically say, and you will be responsible, you will be empowered because of the structures we put in place, the OKRs, the ways we work. Decision making is devolved to you. We will remove friction as much as possible. And I don't mind if you leave after 3 or 4 years because, that's just normal these days. If you can have that honest conversation and commit to people that you'll carry on investing in the roadmap will improve their career, make them interested, and that you'll remove a load of the stuff that really frustrates people in their day-to-day job, then I found you do get people to come in and commit, even when it's not as sexy and exciting as other industries. And then obviously, yeah, you need to pay a fair rate, you need to pay market rate, but you do those things, you can kind of offset. And it means you don't need to be kind of relying on, I don't know, pool tables and table tennis and free pizza and croissants and stuff like that, because people just want to get out of bed in the morning and come to work and go, I actually really enjoy what I'm doing. My career's advancing. I like the people I'm with, and I'm treated as an adult. And I've been in too many corporate environments where, you're in your 30s, your 40s, your 20s, and you're treated like a child, and you have to go through loads of bureaucracy. And I think a lot of people are very passionate about getting away from that. So that creating that culture and that environment is critical to what you do. You just need to make sure that it interacts well with the wider organization, so you don't create a kind of them and us situation where you've got old school, new school, and that can be really challenging.
You mentioned OKRs there. Would you mind, just for anyone who isn't aware, explaining what OKRs are, and then sort of a follow-up question to that? Are they a good tool to potentially align the priorities of this venture with the wider enterprise and almost speaks of one language and create this North Star that everyone is working towards?
Yeah, so OKRs are a quarterly way of, I guess, clarifying for everyone what your priorities are and what direction you're moving in. So you set an objective and then you have key results. When I initially came across them, I just did it because I was told to. But what I've found since is there's huge benefits. In my world, certainly, I have a mixture of rational engineers, rational data scientists and data engineers, and then emotional creative designers and marketeers and all sorts. And often those two, it's a bit like men are from Mars, women from Venus. Those two worlds don't work well together. And what I've found OKRs do is that you can have an objective that is very emotive and creative and gets in people's hearts and gets them excited, and is also really specific. So it kind of tells people what direction they've got to go to and what they do and don't do. And then the key results are the gnarly data, like 70%, 4 out of 5 profit margin of X, whatever it might be. And that allows, what I found is it's not just motivating and aligning, but it means that you remove, we've all sat in meetings where you've got disagreements about what the strategy really is and what it means. It's like crystal clear what you've got to do. So that removes a load of that kind of frustrating chat and confusion. But it also devolves decision making to the people who are actually doing stuff. So they're not always coming to people like me and going, can we do this? Can we do that? It's so obvious what they got to do that they get on with it. I don't have my time caught up in meetings, kind of basically signing stuff off that is pretty obvious. And they feel, again, like they're treated with respect and treated as adults because they're cracking on and moving forward. So I am a sort of passionate supporter of OKRs, but if done in the right way.
Mm. You alluded earlier to some of the initiatives that you've worked on over the past couple of years, but sort of more explicitly across JLR and AAX, what are some of these sort of
Yeah.
big ventures that you've been involved with?
Yeah. So I guess if I use the AA first, we had a strong big bet, that connected car data was going to become more and more available after years of people talking about it. We also knew that the AA had proprietary data and knowledge about why cars break down and how you fix them. That meant that you could create models that would allow you to predict a problem in a car before it happens and work out the best solution for it. Or, in some cases, to be proactive around it. So you could say, I don't know, your Ford Fiesta battery is looking like it's in a poor state. The battery will need replacing in 2 weeks' time, and we let's send someone round, and it'll cost you £150. So you have that end-to-end piece of problem, advice, solution. And then on top of that, you obviously get the feedback loops of once you're fixing something, you know whether your models were right or wrong, and it has this virtuous cycle. So we initially created that as Vixen from the AA, which is a B2C app for members and non-members. It's subscription based because people are actually, or a certain segment of society are really interested in just understanding the health of their vehicle, just like I obsess with looking at Apple Health and Strava and things because I'm really obsessed with what's going on in my body. We took that out into the fleet space and worked in partnership with others, and that is gaining momentum at the moment. And then also looked at how you can use that capability for the core business activities around roadside. So how you triage, which means that you get the best customer outcome for someone because you know what's going on in their car and you know how to fix it quickly. So that's kind of, and I guess we were using machine learning and NLP and vision AI and all sorts of things, but we started it before AI had its recent boom of kind of super enthusiasm around it. And now, we're sort of catching up and go, oh, actually, it was AI, depending on how you define it. So I did that there. And at Jaguar Land Rover before, in Motion, we were building businesses that were looking at how mobility trends were going to change how people access vehicles. And the two most successful businesses were the Out, which is one that I ended up being managing director of, which is on-demand rental. So getting a car delivered to your door at a specific time. So you go for your weekend away. And Pivotal, which is a subscription business where you could change cars on a regular basis. And it was live during COVID at a time where the proposition included being able to give the car back and stop paying. So it was a totally flexible proposition. We had other things in there around insurance. We even looked at electric bikes. We looked at all sorts of things, but those were the two big things because it was looking at new business models and tapping into new segments of the market.
Mm. From these initiatives, you had really good visibility of what's sort of really happening in the industry. It sometimes feels like there's this gap between sort of hype and reality. So things that people talk about at conferences and some of the tech partners talk about in terms of the realm of the possible. And then there's reality when it comes to, okay, we actually don't even have the data products, their processes, etc., that aren't in place. What are some of these sort of big gaps, deltas between where you want to go and sort of the realm of the possible and then what actually reality was on the ground?
I think if I focus in on the connected car space, the challenge, again, like the idea is obvious. Predictive maintenance is an obvious thing. I want my car to be on the road for as long as possible. There's a real customer need, customer pain point, and it all makes sense. The challenge is how you get the data, because you can either use hardware, so get a dongle put in people's cars, but then you've got to convince, I don't know, my mum, your friend, whoever, to put a dongle in their car, which, while it's sort of easy for some people, is a bit intimidating. Or you need the data to come from the OEM directly. The issue there is none of the OEMs provide consistent data between them, which is a difficulty for modeling. The quality of the data can be mixed. The commercial model around accessing the data can be unrealistic. Because a lot of the OEMs have been thinking about how do you monetize data for a long time, but haven't had much traction, you get these kind of crazy business cases built on fictional propositions, and when they hit the real world, they don't make sense. So one OEM, when I first started at the AA, had we gone with them, it would have cost us £2,000 per vehicle per year to access the data we needed to feed our models, which is just completely unrealistic. No one can make those economics work. So we ended up focusing more on the dongle solution, almost as a bridging or a stepping stone to what the future holds, because I think it's far better to get something live which has a few bits to it that you're not quite happy with that you can fix later, rather than being an idealist and waiting for kind of the best data you could possibly get from all the OEMs, because that's just going to take far too long. And then I think there's a piece in it as well around customer take up. When you're trying to market something that is very, very new, it takes a long time to get your messaging right so it lands in people's heads. I don't know if people remember when the iPod came out, it was 1,000 songs in your pocket. And that was genius, right? You just knew what it was. But it took them months and months to get to that, refine that. And then, we all went off and got iPods, which is now an obsolete technology, but it was kind of an interesting example. And it's the same with these new technologies or new ways of doing things. While they make sense to you if you've just had a 1-hour meeting and gone through all the data and the psychology of it, actually, you've got to convince someone to who's just seen an ad on Instagram and they've given it 7 seconds of their life. So how do you hook them? That's a real challenge as well. That hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, what I was sort of thinking about, and also thinking back to sort of related initiatives that I've worked in the past, one of the big challenges was around creating these value cases. So if we think about this example that you mentioned around monitoring vehicle health, there are some potentially more obvious direct metrics that we can influence when it comes to reducing for OEMs warranty spend and for end customers sort of repair costs and increasing vehicle lifetime. But then there are also some potentially more sort of qualitative metrics around brand loyalty and trust, brand equity, net promoter score metrics that hopefully then eventually lead to repeat purchase and purchasing of additional services, etc. How do you approach the sort of business case value conversation in a world where lots of the metrics are potentially about customer experience and some of these sort of quite hard to grasp, less tangible, not direct cost savings related metrics?
Yeah, and I think I'd add an extra element to this or layer, which is when you've just set something up, usually your data is quite sparse. So you
Mm.
can't. Big corporates love analytics. They love
Yeah.
100-page PowerPoints and Excel, and you can't do that in this kind of space. So sometimes the data's not really there. Um, I think you have to have simple business cases that have 2 or 3 assumptions that are your reference point, whether that's a kind of a conversion to revenue,
Mm.
whatever it might be. You have to have that crunchy piece. What we're not doing here is creating free apps that people's friends say are great and get good app
Mm.
store reviews, but don't do anything. That's just a drain on cash, right? So you have to have something that makes economic sense, but you do need to go through the stages of proving product market fit. So saying people like this product, customer satisfaction or NPS or whatever it might be. You understand your audience because you're only really looking for 5 or 10% of the market, and then another 5 or 10, and then another 5 or 10, and then there is economic viability. So you have to have that piece. Um, I would argue that sometimes people look at customer satisfaction and brand loyalty um, and some of the other metrics you talked about in quite a superficial and naive way. Brand loyalty means in a Jaguar Land Rover world, I have a Range Rover and I will buy another Range Rover, which is a big chunk of profit. And I will also recommend buying Range Rovers to my friends when I'm sat in the pub or at a restaurant or whatever. So I think that they're not just warm, woolly metrics. They actually translate through to the core business. It's not like it- one of the greatest problems that I've seen in many of the big corporates I've looked at is leaky bucket, where companies lose a significant percentage of their base of customers. And I would say that's even more extreme in the automotive sector now and in the coming years, because as EV gets introduced and adopted mainstream, it changes everything. You may have loved Volkswagen all your life, but if you look at BYD and go, oh, actually, maybe that's what I want now, it just completely changes the situation. So I think one of the important things for people to do is to take those qualitative, in inverted commas, metrics and actually explain that they are very quantitative. Though they will have a far greater effect on the group P&L than a business that I create that's a subscription or whatever it might be. Like uh, dealing with that kind of those metrics makes a substantial difference to the group.
Mm. But recently we've seen the rise of, well, not so recently anymore, but over the past sort of 2-3 years, we've seen the rise of large language models and based solutions. And there, I guess, is a lot of hype around and lots of studies by the likes of McKinsey around sort of the disruption to the automotive value chain and how business models and profit pools could shift, etc., etc. From your experience, and curious if you have an opinion on that, what are some of the sort of real opportunities over the coming years when it comes to using the likes of ChatGPT and other foundational LLMs for additional product and service creation?
Okay. So I guess there's one piece and then maybe this is the cynicism of an old dog who's gone through this a few times. I have enjoyed working with the likes of McKinsey and the big tech companies over the years. However, I have also seen the profit pool analysis of what it's going to do in 5 years' time, in 5 years' time, in 5 years' time, in the automotive sector, in the consumer electronics sector. I even saw it in the food sector when I worked there about the arrival of organic and things like that. So there's always great profit pool analysis that is instinctively right, but often kind of raises up $1 billion shifts of here, there, and everywhere. And then you live through it on a month to month basis. And actually, people are still driving petrol cars and buying oil and putting in AdBlue and doing all those things, and the kind of the new business model type stuff, which I worked on. Yes, it emerges, but it emerges in very specific use cases like wealthy urbanites or whoever it might be. It's not the whole world shifts and suddenly, I don't know, a farmer in Bremen in the area around Bremen is now kind of doing on demand for his tractor. It's just, so sometimes we just need to take the hype with a pinch of salt. And the way that I try and discipline myself with that is to say, what does the world look like in 3 years' time or 5 years' time, depending on it? What's going to change and what's going to stay the same? And what are my big bets? So as I was looking at automotive, when I started at the AA, my big bets were around connected becoming more prevalent and data becoming more available. And it was about EV becoming a significant but not majority part. And you then just work with that and life becomes a bit more real. So I think we just need to have a watch out on that. In terms of AI and kind of ChatGPT and things like that, it's fascinating because you sort of don't know where it's going to end up. I've been at conferences from some of the big tech companies where everyone's just talking about call centers, which is an obvious place to start, but is also quite a sad and uninspiring place to start. But I think it makes a material difference. And I think if I think of the AA, it helps to get standardized and triage and kind of get that side of things much more efficient. The bit that excites me is obviously kind of what I was doing, which is how do you use that capability to have a customer facing proposition? So it wouldn't take it. I mean, it would take some money and some time, but if you could easily have something where I can say, I've got these problems with my car. What's the problem? What is it? What's the solution? Should I stop driving? Or I don't know, I've just had a call from my elderly relative. They've got this problem. They drive a BMW 5 Series, da, 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 da. That kind of So what excites me is the impact these things can have in the real world to real people, where you suddenly get your elderly relative going, oh, that was really useful. They don't know it's AI because AI kind of freaks out a bit, but it's the next stage. It's the next stage. And I think there's so many opportunities like that inspire me. And then there's so many opportunities like behind the scenes in the back office that I get, but are just not my thing. And I don't know as much about them, like call centers and so on. But yeah, I think that so many places it could go. And if I think back to when I was at Samsung and smartphone was just taking off, we had no clue as to how people would use smartphone. It was just exciting that every 6 months something different happened and it wasn't what we expected. And I think as soon as you put the technology into more and more people's hands, you get all sorts of innovation and exciting things. The real risk is the OEMs try and do everything themselves and they do it badly and in a really uniform way, but with a bit of kind of arrogance that, you know, we need to learn from the smartphone experience. You open things up and you get Spotify, you get Airbnb and all sorts of stuff. You keep it closed and you just get, I don't know, whatever the in-house versions of those were that died a slow death.
Yeah, that's the perfect segue to the final question I want to ask you around. So, if your top 3 recommendations to leaders who are in charge of these business units within some of the incumbents to create and capture value from some of these latest technologies.
What are my top 3 tips?
Yeah.
I think my first piece would be around team and making sure you've got the structures in place, like the OKRs I was talking about earlier. That means that people your people are bright, sensible people. They're creative. They've got so many skills. Create the structures that allows them to make quick decisions, but all moving in one direction together. If you can do that, you can be buccaneering, you can be exciting, you can do cool stuff, and you can move forward. The next tip I would say is, if you're in a big corporate, you're going to have to be really open and explicit with your stakeholders about the level of risk and pivoting and the failures you're going to have, and get their buy-in and understanding that this is how it's going to work, but create governance around it that means it doesn't sound like you're just going to spend a load of money and then have
Mm.
loads of failures and at the end close down the business unit. So you need to get your stakeholders bought in to how it's going to work, so that when it's going badly 9 months in, you've got a reference point you can go back to and say, please hold your nerve, because there'll be a success around the corner. We just don't know where it is. And you've just got to educate them on the brutal reality of it, but also the exciting reality of it. And my third tip would be to play to your unfair advantages. So I think the thing we did really well at InMotion and in JLR was we recognized that we were not mass market. We had cool cars that people really wanted to be in, and we had a brand positioning and a vibe from Range Rover and Land Rover and Defender and all those sorts of things that meant that we lent into that competitive advantage rather than doing something vanilla for everybody. And I think there's a real risk with AI that if everyone's putting in the same prompts and questions and having the same data teams doing the same analysis, the world's going to look really vanilla
Mm.
and boring, and AI could lead to boring stuff. So you have to look for your differentiation that comes from your strengths and your unfair advantages, but also just from your understanding of leaning into human psychology and people. And I think that's where the greatest success is, but also the greatest pride in what you've done, because you see you've done something different and better rather than something so watered down that it's boring and again it gets killed. And just as a sidebar, often the vanilla stuff becomes because you allow senior executives to have too much say in what it looks like and what it is. And they're either risk averse or they're taking a 50 to 60-year-old mindset and applying it to something that is meant to be designed for a completely different demographic. And so you just need to be careful on how you manage, keep them excited, but also stay true to what your customer wants. That's
Mm.
probably more than 3 top tips, but there you go.
No, thank you so much, Tom, for your time and insights today. I really appreciate it. That's been a fascinating conversation.
No problem. It's been a real pleasure talking about it. I love this space, and more than happy to keep talking about it all day.